We have a new operating system installed. Here we can see the login screen. It may vary slightly, depending on which graphical environment we selected. If the default desktop environment is KDE, the login screen will look like this. The application that generates it is called KDM. For GNOME, the text fields for our username and password will appear more in the middle. The idea is exactly the same, and the differences are only in the way of their presentation. We enter our username and password. We'll see what the KDE environment looks like. If you installed a single environment, you don't need to do anything. Just enter the username and password and you'll be logged into the system. In theory, you can also log into the graphical environment as root, but it's not advisable. As I've already emphasized several times, unless you have to perform some administrative actions in the system, you should not work in the administrator's account. It's very dangerous, not only on Linux, but also on Windows or any other system. Fortunately, Linux does not force us to work on the administrative account, and thus makes our work quite safe. The desktop looks kind of familiar. The only difference may be the gray rectangle in the upper left corner. The default view of the KDE desktop is a bit different from the one in Windows. We don't have any icons on the desktop, and the selected directory is displayed as a gray movable frame. You can easily change that. If you prefer the traditional desktop, the KDE provides something like a task manager. The 3 dots in the bar in the bottom left corner. When we click this, we can change the look of our system. The simplest view are the desktop icons. If we click that option, our graphical environment will look and behave exactly like that on Windows. The button in the lower left corner is a typical start menu. Even the arrangement of the elements is similar to that in Windows. We've got something like a start menu, some action icons, applications bar that shows actively running programs, and a traditional tray with a clock and a few additional options. Let's start with the tray. It works exactly like the one in Windows. By default, we'll have a tool for the network management, a volume management tool. The arrow next to the clock works the same as the one in Windows. Icons that at a given time do not bring any new information are hidden there. If we're working on a laptop, the information that we're connected to mains is rather unnecessary to us, so the system will hide it. However, if you unplug the power, the system should show that you are working on battery power. After reconnecting to the mains, the icon disappears because there is no real need to show it. Other elements appear and disappear also, depending on the actions we take. For example, if a portable device is connected, the system will find it, just like in Windows. Unfortunately, on the virtual machine, we must temporarily switch to Windows to indicate that the portable device has been connected to our virtual machine. At this point, Windows, the host computer, will stop the device and the device's operation will be taken over by the client computer, which is our Linux. Of course, if the system is installed directly on the computer, there will be no such problem, because there won't be any proxy. In the case of a virtual machine, we must remember that any equipment that we connect to our computer will be handled by the host system, in our case, Windows, in the first place. That's why it's necessary to switch the handling of a device to VirtualBox, with the buttons on the bottom of the machine's window. Once you've attached your device in the virtual machine, you'll see a menu with all of the options available for your device. We can, for example, open the device in the Explorer, something like the Windows Explorer, an application called Dolphin. This will allow us to view the contents of the memory stick. Like on Windows, if we want to remove such devices, it's recommended to remove them the so-called safe way. Why are we doing this? In fact, for a typical Linux user, this operation is quite natural, and it's meant to inform the system that the device is no longer used. We give the system time to save all data. You should be aware that any operating system, either Windows or Linux, writes data to the hard disk only in the so-called idle time. It's not a priority operation because it takes a lot of time from the point of view of the operating system. The data is stored in some internal memory until it's saved to the hard drive. If you remove a memory stick or a floppy disk too early, the data may not be saved. The problem with this was relatively more noticeable in the times of the USB 1.1 protocol, when transfer was really slow. And even in the case of small files, data losses were potentially large. In the case of USB 2.0, file copying takes a short time and is usually shifted to the so-called idle time. That's when the file is actually stored on the removable device, and saving takes only a brief moment, so the risk of data loss is small. However, using this eject option is recommended both in Linux as well as Windows tool, so that especially when the data is very important, we avoid potential problems. As for the rest of the system, the behavior of the desktop is fairly intuitive and consistent with what we should expect when using a Windows Explorer tool. The right mouse button brings up a menu, where we can create folders or files. The behavior is exactly the same as on Windows. From this level, we can call some additional commands to, for example, add a panel somehow. Add a new bar to the left, right, top, or whatever your heart desires. Using it, we can choose the directory, the contents of which will appear on our desktop as icons. The desktop directory is the default, but in KDE, there is nothing that prevents us from showing icons from any directory we want. There are other interesting things we can change. We can use a different desktop background, redefine mouse actions. We can change the icons ordering. These are all traditional operations that define the appearance of our desktop. It's quite intuitive. Sorting elements, grid icons layout, it's all available.